"I don't want money," the man said, his voice low, calm, steady. "I just want to mop your floor in exchange for a meal for my daughter." Silence didn't fall. It snapped. 300 of the city's richest turned in unison, their designer shoes silent on the marble as they turned toward the source of disruption. Between the gilded doors of Grand Asteria Hall stood a man who clearly didn't belong, except maybe in a service corridor or utility closet. His boots were worn to the thread. His jacket, a navy work coat, sagged from the weight of years and manual labor. On the upper arm, barely clinging, was a tiny patch, a heart drawn in pink crayon stitched lovingly onto the fabric with clumsy thread. Behind him stood a little girl no older than 7. Her small hands gripped the hem of his coat. Her shoes were too small, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She held a stuffed bear missing one eye, and she looked up at the chandeliers like they were stars she'd only seen in picture books. The music stopped. Even the string quartet lost its rhythm. Up front, in the sea of satin gowns and tailored tuxedos, Valerie Wynne, the iron-veined CEO of Valerian Group, stood motionless champagne flute, poised midair. Her posture, regal chin, tilted lips unreadable. She had long since mastered the art of blinking slower than anyone else in the room. Power didn't flinch. Next to her, CFO Gareth Pike let out a slow, incredulous chuckle. "Oh, this is new," he smirked loud enough for the whole room to hear. "A janitor. Crashing a fundraiser." He raised an eyebrow at security, who began to move. "I'm not asking for a handout," the man interrupted softly, stepping forward. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the murmurs like a bow across broken strings. "My name's Ethan Cole. I'm here because I saw the poster outside, the one about helping the unhoused, the unemployed, the forgotten. My daughter and I haven't eaten since yesterday. I'll clean every inch of this ballroom if it means she gets a hot plate." The crowd tittered, half pity, half sneer. And Ethan glanced to his left, where a gleaming black Fazioli grand piano sat beneath a spray of orchids. "That piano's a little out of tune. Half a step flat on the high A. I could fix that too, if you'll let me." The room burst into laughter. A billionaire's gala, crystal chandeliers, imported truffles, and now a janitor offering to mop the floor and tune a piano. It was absurd, unbelievable, almost entertaining, which is why Valerie didn't wave him away just yet. She tilted her head. Her voice was cool measured. "You can tune a Fazioli, I've done more with less." Ethan replied, eyes meeting hers unflinching. "If you'll give me 5 minutes, I'll give this room something it won't forget. All I ask is a meal for my daughter." Someone snorted. Another said, "Let the man perform cheaper than hiring a clown." Valerie turned slightly. "If I let you touch that piano and someone in this room sheds a tear, I'll pay you $10,000. If not, you leave. Quietly. With nothing." Gasps. A few guests applauded the drama. Gareth lifted his glass. "I'll throw in another 10. That's 20 grand for a mop and a song." He grinned. "Let's see this heartstring hustle." Ethan looked down at his daughter, who tugged his sleeve. He knelt and whispered something in her ear. She nodded and held out her stuffed bear like it was armor. He rose, walked toward the piano, slow sure, not a trace of nerves in his gait. Each footstep left a faint, dusty imprint on the polished floor. They would wipe it up later, but for now the ballroom watched those footprints like a map being drawn in real time. He unhooked a small tool from his belt, an old scratched screwdriver with paint chips on the handle. He slid it into the tuning hole, tested the pedal, adjusted the bench. Maya Tran, a college senior volunteering behind the pastry table, blinked as she realized her hands were trembling. The whole room was holding its breath. Gareth leaned toward Valerie and murmured, "He'll bomb. $5 says he breaks a key." Valerie didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed not on Ethan, but on the little girl still standing at the door, hugging her bear like a lifeline. Ethan sat. His fingers hovered above the keys. He didn't play right away. He touched just one note, middle C. It rang out clear, simple, painfully honest. and the room so loud a moment ago felt suddenly too large, too still. He didn't rush. He didn't showboat. He played like a man who had nothing left to prove, like someone playing to remember something, or someone. A lullaby began to emerge, slow, rustic, filled with the kind of warmth you didn't learn at conservatories but found on sleepless nights when the power was out and your daughter cried from thunder. The melody was nothing fancy, but it carried something strange and undeniable truth. No one noticed when the servers stopped moving, or when a man in the back lowered his phone and forgot to record, or when Gareth's smirk began to twitch into discomfort. Maya blinked away tears she didn't see coming. A guest near the front touched the clasp on her necklace, heart pounding without knowing why. The janitor hadn't just walked into a ballroom, he'd cracked it open. Valerie took one step forward, her lips parted. But before she could speak, Ethan changed keys. Just slightly, and something shifted in the air. As if, beneath the marble and money and crystal, this building this night had always been waiting for one honest note. He found it, and he played it like a prayer. "What's next?" Gareth Pike called out, breaking the trance. "Is he gonna mop the piano now?" The ballroom erupted. Laughter spilled like champagne. It wasn't polite laughter. It wasn't nervous laughter. It was crystal laughter, sharp cold echoing off the marble walls with the kind of cruelty only privilege could polish to perfection. Ethan didn't flinch. He gently lifted his fingers from the keys, let the last note fade into the velvet air, and stood. His daughter Luna was still near the door, clutching her bare eyes wide. He gave her the smallest nod, a silent promise. Valerie Wynne watched him closely. Her expression hadn't changed, but something behind her eyes had. She turned slowly to Gareth. "You think this is a joke?" Gareth's smirk didn't budge. "Come on, Val. He plays a lullaby and we're supposed to hand him a medal. This is a billion-dollar fundraiser, not America's Got Sob Stories." A few in the room chuckled in agreement, relieved someone had said it. Valerie looked back at Ethan. His hands were calloused, his coat frayed, but there was a stillness in him that felt immovable, like a pillar they'd mistaken for dust. He stepped forward once more, not toward the piano, but toward her. "I didn't come here to entertain you," Ethan said evenly. "I came to earn a dinner for my daughter. You made it a performance. You made it a gamble," Valerie replied, voice still cool. He nodded. "Then let's finish the wager." Gasps flickered through the crowd. Some leaned forward, others pulled out phones again. This wasn't just an interruption anymore. This was a scene. Valerie held up a single hand and the murmurs hushed. She stepped into the center of the room, heels clicking against the marble gown, shimmering like moonlight on water. "One song," she said. "One chance to make someone cry. And if you do, $10,000 and dinner." Gareth raised his glass again. "I'll double it. 20 grand says this ends in silence." A man near the back muttered, "What's he going to play the world's smallest violin?" But Valerie wasn't smiling anymore. She was studying Ethan the way a master jeweler studies a crack in a flawless diamond, unsure if it was a flaw or the start of something real. Ethan nodded once, then he did something that made the whole room blink. He stepped back toward the piano, not with urgency or showmanship, but with reverence, like someone approaching an altar. Before sitting, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something odd, a tiny screwdriver, faded red, paint chipped and old. Maya Tran, the pastry server near the dessert table, tilted her head. She recognized the tool. Her dad had one just like it, always tucked in the drawer they weren't supposed to touch. Ethan used it to adjust the piano bench. Then he gently slid it into the pocket of his coat again like it was sacred. Then he sat. And this time he didn't hesitate. No warm-up, no lingering fingers. He played. But it wasn't a lullaby. It was silence-shaped. He played slow, deliberate notes that left space between each phrase. The kind of space where breath lives, where memory curls up and hides, where something lost might be found again if you listen closely enough. He shifted slightly in rhythm, half a beat late, then half a breath early, just enough to make the heart stutter in its cage. It wasn't beautiful the way a concerto is beautiful. It was beautiful the way a scar is beautiful because it meant something had been survived. The room changed. The laughter didn't return. Maya blinked hard. Her hands shook slightly and a single chocolate tart slid off her tray unnoticed. Near the back, a woman in pearls gripped her husband's arm. A security guard looked away and cleared his throat. Ethan's right hand lifted, struck a single high, A, then held it just a hair too long. The tension was unbearable. Gareth shifted in place. "It's just music," he whispered to himself, but it didn't sound convincing. And then a sound broke the silence. Not applause, not a gasp. A sob. Soft. Real. Valerie Wynne brought a hand to her cheek. Her eyes blinked wide twice. She stared at her palm as if surprised by the wetness there. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper. "I remember this," she said, but not to anyone. "My mother used to play this in winter, before the ambulance lights." Ethan's fingers drifted across the last chord. He didn't embellish it. He let it land like a heartbeat. Steady. Whole. Then he rose and said the words that would hang in the air long after the lights dimmed, "You owe my daughter a dinner." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They stood. In one synchronized movement, chairs scraped back, hands went to hearts, and the ones who had laughed first now looked anywhere but at each other. Valerie exhaled sharply. Not defeat, not regret, recognition of something buried long ago under crystal and power. Ethan reached down, picked up the stuffed bear Luna had dropped in the doorway, and walked back toward his daughter. As he knelt beside her, Luna whispered, "Daddy." They stopped laughing. He smiled and kissed her temple. They finally heard, he said. The sound of Ethan's boots on the marble echoed louder now, not because they were any heavier, but because the room had gone dead quiet. Not reverent, not stunned, exposed. He left the piano behind as if it had nothing more to say, walking slowly back to where Luna waited by the door. Her arms wrapped around the bear again, eyes never leaving him, as if his music hadn't stopped, just moved into his steps. Each of his footprints dulled the mirror-bright floor. They didn't belong here, these dusty souls. Not in a ballroom built to reflect only perfection. But now those marks on the marble looked like a signature, like the truth had walked in and left its name behind. From the edge of the crowd, someone whispered, "Did you hear that note at the end?" Someone else replied, "No, vibrato, just raw." Pedal work was unreal. That wasn't beginner's instinct. Gareth Pike tried to laugh again, but this time the sound landed flat. The tension in his jaw was visible now, like he was chewing on something bitter. "He's a hustler," Gareth said under his breath. "Came in with a plan. Knows how to milk a room." Valerie didn't answer. She was still standing in the same place, but her posture had changed. Shoulders dropped, arms loose at her sides. Something had cracked beneath her armor, though she didn't yet know what it was, only that it had been there for a long time. Ethan stopped 3 feet from her. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He simply looked at her and said, "That's the real price of hunger, Ms. Wynne. You don't lose weight. You lose dignity if you let them take it." Valerie's eyes flickered, not offense, not anger. Recognition. "How long," she asked, "have you been playing like that?" "Since I could reach the keys," he replied. "And mopping floors? Since I couldn't afford to reach them anymore." There it was. The sentence no one expected. The truth that made the room shift again, like the floor had tilted just slightly beneath their designer shoes. Maya Tran watched from the side, her tray of half-melted pastries forgotten. She had felt the air thicken when he played that final note. But now, it was something else. Like the man in front of them had tuned the room itself, and they were all just beginning to notice how off-key they'd been. Gareth cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Look," he said too loudly. "You got your performance. You got your tears. Hell will throw in the 10 grand, get you and the kid a buffet table. But now, it's time to stop. Valerie's voice was ice, not cold, but still, and deadly precise. Gareth froze mid-sentence. She turned fully toward Ethan, studying him the way a person studies a map before stepping into unfamiliar country. You said the piano was out of tune, she said quietly. Half a step flat on the high A. Ethan nodded once. Slight enough most wouldn't hear, but enough to haunt someone who listens for a living. Her lips parted, a flicker of memory passing like a shadow behind her eyes. Then she asked a question no one expected. What kind of screwdriver was that? Ethan blinked just once. Flathead, red handle, used to be my dad's, paint chipped. I keep it for touch adjustments. You fixed the pedal with that, I fixed more than that. The air went thick again, like something was rising, old, unspoken, nearly forgotten. Valerie looked at the piano, then back at him. Play one more. Ethan shook his head. That wasn't the deal. She raised an eyebrow. It wasn't about the deal, he added. It was about feeding my daughter. The music was just the only honest currency I had left. The ballroom was so still you could hear the fizz in the champagne flutes. Luna took a step forward, looked up at Valerie. Her voice was small like tissue paper. Can I eat now? It was the kind of question that shattered masks. Valerie's throat worked, but no sound came. Then she knelt, slowly, carefully. Her knees touched the marble floor as if gravity had suddenly returned to the room. She looked Luna in the eye. What do you like to eat? Sweetheart? Luna looked at Ethan. He nodded. Mac and cheese, she whispered. The kind that's still hot when you open the lid. Valerie smiled, faint, uncertain, but real. I'll see what we can do. Then she stood, straightened her shoulders, turned to Gareth. I'm calling for hot food, not canapes, real plates, real portions, delivered, now. He stared. Val, this is not your moment. She turned to the crowd. Anyone who doesn't like it can leave, but you'll be leaving behind your name on every unpaid promise you made to the people outside these walls. A few guests began murmuring, some defensively, others guiltily, but no one left. Ethan watched her quietly. Valerie looked at him. I said 10,000, she said. But I was wrong. That performance, what you gave us, that was worth far more than tears. She pulled a black envelope from her clutch and handed it to him. He didn't open it. He simply said, make sure it goes to Asteria Shelter, and that it gets there on time, not when it's convenient. Valerie nodded. Done. Ethan hesitated. And not just to be seen doing it. Another beat of silence. Then Valerie said something she hadn't said in 15 years. Thank you for hearing what no one else could. Ethan looked around the room one last time. Some still held their glasses like shields. Others lowered their eyes. He turned to Luna. You ready to eat, kiddo? She nodded, grabbing his hand. And together they walked down the same marble floor past the chandeliers, the silent crowd, and the piano that, for once, sat perfectly in tune. They didn't walk out like guests. They didn't walk out like performers. They walked out like the only two people in the room who had never forgotten what music was for. He didn't sit down to play. Not yet. Ethan stood beside the grand piano, one hand resting gently on the polished lid like a man saying goodbye to an old friend. Luna was now seated on a cushioned bench near the front of the ballroom feet, swinging over the edge, holding a small paper box of steaming mac and cheese. Maya Tran had brought it herself, trembling a little as she knelt to hand it over like she was delivering something sacred. The room had shifted, not just in tone, but in weight. Gone was the smugness, the laughter. The air now held something heavier, denser, something closer to truth. Valerie Wynne stood at the far end of the hall, arms crossed loosely, her glass untouched. She watched Ethan not with the gaze of a corporate titan, but with the eyes of someone trying to remember a name long forgotten. He took a slow breath and turned back toward the keys. And then he sat. This time, no one made a sound. No wisecracks. No raised glasses. Even Gareth Pike stood silently by the fireplace, face tight, jaw clenched. The last note had burned a mark he hadn't expected, and this, whatever this was, felt like it might go deeper. Ethan didn't test the keys. He didn't need to. His fingers fell into place like they were coming home, and then he began to play. The melody was simple, soft, a lullaby, plain and unpretentious, built on no more than 5 notes. It was the kind of tune that had no name, no composer, no sheet music, just a rhythm carried down through bedtime, whispers passed from parent to child. But in Ethan's hands it became more than a song. It became a memory. It became a mirror. Valerie felt at first an ache blooming beneath her ribs. The second chord echoed like footsteps down an empty hallway. She didn't know why her chest tightened, only that it did. And then came the third note, clean sustained. Her eyes blurred. Suddenly she was 10 again. A snowy night. A brownstone in Harlem. Her mother's fingers dancing over a battered upright piano while Valerie lay curled on the couch, too tired to protest bedtime, but unwilling to close her eyes. Her mother played that very rhythm, soft, stumbling sweet, and whispered, "Sleep isn't the end, baby girl. It's just a breath between notes." Valerie hadn't thought of that moment in decades. Now it crashed into her like a forgotten wave. The room around her blurred. Not because of the lighting, but because her tears had come without warning. Across the hall, Maya was crying too quietly, shoulders trembling as she held the empty tray like a shield. Her father had been a janitor. Her mother, a housekeeper. This song, whatever it was, felt like the stories they never got to tell. Luna, halfway through her dinner, put down her fork and leaned toward the piano. "I remember this," she whispered to herself. "Daddy sings it when I get scared of thunder." Ethan heard her. He let the phrase drift, then circled back gently, looping the melody like a rocking cradle. The notes slowed, softened, faded into something not quite silence but more like a breath. Inhale, pause, exhale. Even Gareth couldn't hide the crack in his composure now. He turned away, blinking too fast, muttering something about dust in the air. And then Ethan changed keys. Subtly. A half step up. Not for flair, but for light. The melody lifted like sunrise through a broken window. Not triumphant, but open, hopeful. And that was when it happened. A woman near the back fur, stole diamond necklace eyes, swollen from memories she hadn't visited in years, covered her mouth and wept. Not delicately, not politely, but openly. Valerie stepped forward, stunned. One by one, other guests followed. A man in a navy tux. A young assistant who'd spent the night managing name tags. A former senator. All of them moved closer to the piano, not to see, but to feel. As if drawn by something they didn't understand but knew they needed. And still, Ethan played, until finally he let the last chord settle into the space between them all. No flourish, no bow, just a single lingering note that fell into the silence like the final heartbeat of a story that didn't want to end. He stood. No one clapped, because applause would have cheapened it. Valerie met his gaze across the distance. "You didn't just play music," she said quietly. "You played memory." Ethan's voice was soft, but it carried, "Sometimes the only way to speak is to remember out loud." She nodded. "You made me remember something I forgot I'd lost." And Ethan, calm, tired, real, replied, "Then maybe I earned that meal." Luna stood up and walked to her father. She held his hand without asking. The entire room watched as she looked up at Valerie and said with all the innocence in the world, "Are you gonna cry again tomorrow?" Valerie surprised herself with a laugh. It wasn't polished or graceful. It cracked at the edges. "I hope so," she said. "I hope I never stop." It started with a whisper. Not a voice, but a note, sharp, deliberate, slicing through the thick hush like a flame cutting silk. Ethan hadn't warned them this time. He didn't pause, didn't ask permission. He just placed his fingers on the keys again and lit a match. The first few notes were calm, soft, almost gentle, the kind of tone that invites you to lean in. But then he shifted. One wrist flicked. His left hand dove low. The right A blur. 10 seconds. That's all it took. 10 seconds of unfiltered brilliance, of motion so precise it bordered on impossible. His hands moved like wind threading through steel wires, controlled chaos perfectly executed. Every strike of a key echoed like a drumbeat that belonged in a different world. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was a storm. And the storm had chosen now to arrive. Valerie Wynne stepped back, startled, not afraid, but jolted awake. Her eyes tracked his hands like a woman trying to memorize a spell being cast before it vanished. Gareth Pike's mouth hung open. He whispered to no one, "What in God's name?" But even he didn't blink. The ballroom had become a stage of reckoning. In that single burst of virtuosity, Ethan had said everything he'd held back, every humiliation swallowed, every job interview turned down after seeing the mop handle in his car, every assumption made the moment they saw his boots. He didn't raise his voice, he raised the bar and shattered it. Then, just as quickly as it came, the fury faded. He pulled back, spun the tempo into reverse like a craftsman smoothing fresh clay. The fire was over, but the heat still lingered. Ethan looked up only once, locking eyes with Valerie. And in that silence a question rang louder than any note. "What else have you misunderstood?" Maya stood frozen by the dessert table, her chest tight, her fingers white around the tray. Her eyes shimmered not just with tears, but with respect, the kind that only appears when someone reveals a depth you didn't know to look for. Behind her, a young violinist who had earlier rolled his eyes now wiped his glasses and whispered, "That wasn't even a showpiece. That was proof." Valerie stepped forward, slowly drawn in as if tethered. "You could have opened with that," she said softly. Ethan stood, his hands still hovering just above the keys. "And you would have heard what you expected." She blinked. "Sometimes," he added, "you have to earn the right to be loud." There it was, the sentence that struck deeper than any crescendo. He stepped away from the piano, not dramatically, but with the kind of quiet that followed lightning. His hands returned to his sides. The faded red screwdriver peeked from his coat pocket like a badge, like an old scar that no longer needed to be hidden. "Who taught you to play like that?" Valerie asked, voice low, reverent now. "My mother," he said. "Then, my mistakes." She stared at him for a moment longer, then said, "And the fire?" Ethan shrugged. "That wasn't for the room, that was for me." And Luna from her seat added softly, "He only plays fast when he's sad and brave at the same time." The crowd turned. Some chuckled gently. But it wasn't mockery. It was awe. Ethan bent down and kissed his daughter's forehead. "You always say the loudest truths in the softest voice." Luna grinned, then went back to her mac and cheese like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. Guests were no longer watching from a distance, they were inching closer, crossing invisible lines of status they'd spent lifetimes building. A man in his 60s silver tie-board chair of a medical foundation stepped up. "That piece you just played, do you have it recorded?" Ethan shook his head. "It's not written. It's remembered. You composed." That Ethan hesitated. Composed is a fancy word for surviving out loud. The man just nodded, stunned. "If you ever do record it, let me know. I want my kids to hear what courage sounds like." Maya suddenly stepped forward, tray still in hand. "Wait," she said, breathless. "Did you play that piece? While tuning the pedal earlier, did you know that was going to happen?" Ethan smiled small. "I didn't play it because the pedal was fixed. I fixed the pedal so I could play it." Valerie covered her mouth again, not crying this time, just absorbing. She looked around. This wasn't her gala anymore. This wasn't a fundraiser. This had become something else, something holy, a reckoning wrapped in melody, and she, for all her power and poise, had almost missed it. She turned to Gareth, who was still frozen, hands half raised like he'd meant to applaud but forgot how. "Say something," she murmured. He muttered that wasn't possible. Valerie turned back to Ethan. "You changed the air in this room." Ethan met her eyes. "No," he said. "I just played what was already in it." She didn't mean to cry. Billionaires don't cry in ballrooms, not with mascara worth more than some people's rent, not under lights this bright, not in front of men who once begged for her signature on million-dollar deals. But the tear came anyway, silent, hot, uninvited. It slipped past Valerie Wynn's perfectly sculpted cheekbone and landed on the rim of her untouched champagne flute. No one pointed it out. No one dared. She stood frozen, one hand slightly trembling, her breath caught in the middle of something too large to name. Because in that moment, under the chandeliers in a room designed for power displays and political photographs, she wasn't CEO of Valerian Group. She was a daughter, a girl in wool socks, sitting at her mother's feet, listening to a lullaby. That same song, that same aching C note, that same feeling that the world, no matter how loud, could be quieted by one honest melody. And now it had returned, not from a concert pianist, not from a headline guest, but from a janitor, from a man with worn boots, a daughter in tow, and a heart stitched to his coat. Valerie wiped her cheek and felt the second tear before she could stop it. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't shift or smirk or bow. He simply stood beside the piano with the calm presence of someone who had long ago made peace with being underestimated. He had made no move to leave, no attempt to demand applause or payment, just stood still and steady, waiting to see if anyone else in the room still knew how to feel. Gareth Pike, on the other hand, looked like he had swallowed a lemon whole. His face was flushed, mouth-tight hands twitching with a need to reclaim control. "We've heard enough," he barked, stepping forward. "It's a piano piece." "Lovely. But let's not rewrite history because someone played a pretty tune." Murmurs rippled across the room. Valerie didn't move. Gareth's voice rose desperate. "We're here to raise capital for a shelter, not indulge. Whatever this is. Emotion doesn't fund infrastructure. Nostalgia doesn't pay rent." He turned to the crowd. "Let's return to the reason we came. Let's get back to business." But business had already changed, because hearts had changed, and no spreadsheet in the world could outscore that. Ethan looked Gareth in the eye, unshaken. "You ever been cold, Mr. Pike? Not the kind a coat fixes, but the kind that crawls into your soul because you realize no one sees you," Gareth scoffed. "Don't manipulate this room." "I'm not," Ethan said calmly. "But if you're so sure no one here has ever been invisible, then maybe you should ask why so many of them are crying." Silence. Then Valerie stepped forward. Each heel click was deliberate. She moved past Gareth like he was part of the furniture, stopping just a breath away from Ethan. Her voice, when it came, was raw. 10 years ago, someone tuned my mother's piano. Quietly, anonymously, she'd just passed. I couldn't speak at the memorial, but the piano played, every note in place. She swallowed. I never found out who tuned it. I only found a note under the fallboard. 2 letters. She looked him straight in the eye. E.C. The room inhaled. Ethan gave a soft nod. "I didn't do it for credit," he said. "I did it so she could be remembered in tune." Her chin quivered. "That was the only thing that brought my father to tears." "I remember," Ethan said. "He stayed after the service, sat alone at the bench, didn't say a word, just listened to the silence." Valerie looked down, lost in the memory. Then she reached into her clutch and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was yellowed soft at the edges. She opened it. 2 letters, faded, E.C. The audience leaned in. Valerie looked up. Why didn't you tell me Ethan met her eyes? You weren't listening then. The line didn't land like a slap. It landed like a bell tolling truth. She didn't argue. She didn't deflect. She nodded. Then she turned to Gareth. You changed the disbursement terms for the Asteria shelter, didn't you? Gareth blinked. Excuse me. You rerouted operational funds, deferred release cycles, because you wanted to optimize cash flow during the IPO window. Gareth's mouth opened, but the words didn't come. I signed the paperwork, Valerie said, her voice steady now, but I didn't read it. I trusted you. That's on me. Val, you don't understand how finance works. I understand how people freeze on sidewalks, she snapped. I understand how mothers skip meals so their kids can eat. I understand that a janitor had to walk into my ballroom and remind me what we're supposed to be fighting for. And then she said the words no one expected. You're fired, Gareth. Gasps. You are removed from all funding oversight effective immediately. You will vacate your position tonight. Gareth's face turned beet red. You can't. Security can escort you if needed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. 2 guards stepped forward. Gareth glanced at the crowd. No one moved to stop them. Not a single voice rose in protest. He was already irrelevant. When he was gone, the room seemed to breathe for the first time. Valerie turned back to Ethan. I said $10,000, she said quietly. But that was before I understood the real value of what you gave us. She opened her clutch again, pulled out a sleek black card. I'm committing $10 million over the next 3 years. To Asteria. Fully transparent, fully accelerated. Murmurs, shock, respect. And I want you, she added to oversee it, as a citizen supervisor. Paid. Full rights. Ethan blinked. Why me? Because you've lived the truth. And because you know how to listen. He looked down at Luna. She smiled. Then he nodded. I accept, he said. But only if we build more than beds. We build beginnings. Valerie smiled through the tears. Agreed. The ballroom erupted, not in applause, but in motion. People crossing aisles, strangers shaking hands, a QR code lighting up on the big screen, sponsor a skill, sponsor a second chance. And in the center of it all stood a janitor, his daughter, and a billionaire, 3 lives rerouted by one forgotten melody. A slow murmur moved through the ballroom like a wave breaking over marble. But Ethan didn't bask in it. He stood quietly, one hand resting on the edge of the fazioli, his other hand loosely holding Luna's fingers. The screwdriver in his pocket, a red-handled relic that had mended more than just pedal bolts tonight, barely moved. It was almost like it knew its job wasn't over yet. Across from him, Valerie Wynne was no longer the woman who had walked onto that stage an hour earlier. She had arrived in diamonds. She now stood in dust, soul dust, the kind that rises when you dig up something you buried long ago. You're not just a janitor, she said softly, as though admitting it out loud made the air more honest. No, Ethan replied, but I've been one long enough to see how people treat the ones they think are. There it was again, one of those lines, the kind that didn't need volume to thunder, the kind that carried truth on its back like a flag. From the crowd, a fragile voice broke the silence. Excuse me? I know that name. An elderly man stepped forward. Silver cane, sharp wool coat, a face like time had carved it with purpose. He looked vaguely familiar to those in the room, though most couldn't place him until Maya gasped, tray shaking in her hands. Is that Harold Quinn? She whispered. The record producer Valerie turned visibly stunned. Harold, the man, smiled gently. Didn't think I'd get dragged into a fundraiser tonight, but I heard the music from the hallway, and I knew that pedal touch, that phrasing. No one ghosts a C major chord like that unless they've been inside the soul of an instrument. He pointed his cane at Ethan. You used to work for me, didn't you? Back in Brooklyn, Steinway shop on 28th. Ethan gave a half smile. That was a few lifetimes ago. No, just one. You just lived it deeper than most." The crowd leaned in. The moment sharpened. "I remember now," Harold said, eyes lighting up. "You weren't on payroll. You were the kid who used to sneak in at night after hours, clean the floor, and fix every action the day techs left sloppy. Never signed your name. We only found out when one of your fixes won a blind tone test." Ethan nodded. "You called me a ghost." "I was wrong," Harold said, voice catching. "You weren't a ghost. You were the glue." Someone in the crowd let out a soft, stunned breath. Valerie stepped toward Harold. "Is this true?" Harold turned to her. "I offered him a job, full-time. He vanished the next week. Thought I scared him off." Ethan's voice came quiet but clear. "I didn't disappear. I dropped out. My wife passed during childbirth. Luna came early. I took what I could get. Night shifts, mop buckets, something close to her crib." Valerie's expression shattered. The image of this man, this father pushing a mop after tucking in a newborn, hit her like an invisible freight train. You could have had anything she said. A recording career, your name on album sleeves. "I had something better," Ethan said. "A daughter who knew her father came home every night. Music can wait. Children don't." And that was the line that cracked whatever defenses were left in the room. Harold took off his hat. "You saved my studio from lawsuits and mediocrity, and I didn't even know your name." "You weren't supposed to," Ethan replied. "People like me, we're just the hands beneath the polish." Valerie looked down at Luna, still holding her father's hand like it was the whole world. "She saved you too," Valerie whispered. Ethan smiled, soft and tired. "She saves me every day." There was a pause, long sacred. Then Harold stepped forward and reached into his coat. He pulled out an old photo, a younger version of himself standing with a teenage artist beside a grand piano. He handed it to Valerie. "That piano," he said, "is the same model you have here tonight, and the technician who brought it back to life before that photo was taken. That was him." He looked at Ethan. "Son, that Fazioli has been waiting for you to come home for 15 years. And with those words, the ballroom shifted once again. This wasn't about charity anymore. This was about restoration, not just of a shelter or a piano or a name, but of dignity, of the truth. Valerie turned to the crowd. "This man didn't crash our party," she said. "He tuned it. He realigned what we forgot, the heart, the purpose." She reached behind her and pulled the gala's donation card from the podium. Then, without ceremony, she walked to Ethan and placed it in his hand. "You've already given more than any check ever could," she said. "But I hope this helps you build something bigger, for people like you, people like Luna." Ethan looked at it and then looked around, at Harold, at Maya, at the servers, at the guards, at the 100 little eyes in the corners who had never seen a janitor stand tall in a room like this. Then he handed the card back. "I'm not taking this," he said. "Not for me." Valerie froze. "What I wanted in a trust," Ethan said. "To fund vocational programs through Asteria, trade tracks, paid apprenticeships. Every dollar goes to skills that can't be automated and to people who were never taught they had worth." A pause. Then Maya's voice broke small but strong. I'm studying social work. I was just doing this job for credit, but if that program happens, I want in." Ethan looked at her, smiled. "You just were." And he pulled a clean folded napkin from his pocket, one of the only nice things he owned, and handed it to her. "Welcome to the work," he said. The chandelier above them didn't flicker, but the silence in the room did. It held its breath. Ethan stepped forward, not aggressively, not theatrically. He simply moved the way truth does when it's done waiting. He laid a weathered manila folder atop the Fazioli's gleaming lid. The contrast was almost poetic, hand-scrawled margins, dog-eared corners, cheap ink bleeding through pages of eviction notices, unpaid labor logs, and deferred maintenance reports. "This," Ethan said calmly, "is what lives behind the marble." Valerie Wynne didn't speak. Her eyes scanned the folder as if trying to remember when her company stopped printing these documents on real paper. Gareth Pike, standing stiff near the ballroom's bar, gave a thin-lipped smile that was more twitch than grin. "And what exactly are we looking at?" he asked. "You're looking at delayed disbursements," Ethan replied. 3 months of withheld operating funds for Asteria Shelter, utility cutoff notices, layoff slips for the overnight staff, a list of residents who were relocated or pushed out because there wasn't enough to keep the lights on. "That's," Gareth began, but Ethan raised one hand palm, steady. "There's also something else," he added. "Emails, forwarded by mistake. Your name on every delay, Mr. Pike. Holding funds to optimize liquidity pre-IPO. Playing with lives like poker chips." The crowd stirred. Some gasped. Others stood completely still as though movement might make them complicit. Valerie's expression was unreadable, but the room could feel it, something inside her locking into place. "You forged my signature?" she asked quietly. Gareth straightened. "I didn't forge anything. You approved the restructure. I signed a summary," she said, voice sharper now. "You buried the clause changes in appendices, deferred release, converted grant allocations into conditional disbursements tied to shareholder metrics." He shrugged. "That's finance. It's not illegal." No, Ethan cut in just inhuman. It landed hard. Valerie stepped away from the piano heels like hammers on the marble. Her body moved with corporate grace, but her voice now trembled not from fear, but from something colder clarity. "I built Valerian on a single promise," she said, turning toward the crowd, "that no bottom line would ever be higher than our moral one." She looked at Gareth. "You violated that promise. Not quietly, not privately, but publicly. Because when people were sleeping on steps with job offers in hand, you were shifting decimal points." His face paled. "Val, don't do this." "I'm not," she said. "You already did." Then she turned to the security staff by the side of the ballroom. "Escort Mr. Pike from the premises. As of this moment, he is relieved of all responsibilities at Valerian Group and its subsidiaries." Gareth sputtered. "I'm the CFO. You don't have the authority. I'm the majority stakeholder," Valerie said, cutting him off with the sharpness of ice. "Sit down or be removed, standing." Security stepped forward. No one moved to intervene. Not one hand lifted for Gareth. Not even a whisper of protest. He stood, adjusted his tie, and walked out alone. No applause, just silence. And Ethan, who watched not with triumph but with the quiet ache of someone who knew this wasn't victory. This was repair. Valerie turned back toward the crowd. "Tonight was supposed to be about funding a shelter," she said, voice now softer. "But a janitor walked in and reminded us what shelter really means. Safety, dignity, a meal, a voice." She faced Ethan again. "That folder may be the most important document I've ever read." He nodded. "It shouldn't have to exist." Valerie inhaled, then walked toward the podium. "We're not pledging 10,000, she said. "We're not pledging 10 million. Gasps. "We're rebuilding Asteria from the ground up. Full funding restored immediate release. I'm committing 10 million tonight and 10 million more over the next 3 years. Not as a donation, but as a debt we owe." The LED screen behind her lit up QR code, shimmering like glass. A new header from surviving to serving. Sponsor. 1 life. 1 skill. 1 year. Phones across the room lit like stars. Valerie stepped down again and looked Ethan in the eye. "But I can't do this alone," she said. "And I don't want another executive telling me what compassion costs. I want you. Co-lead, oversight, full salary." Ethan looked at Luna. She nodded, slowly, still hugging her bear. Then he turned to Maya, standing off to the side, eyes shining. "You still in school?" She nodded. 2 semesters left. Social work, trauma-informed care. He smiled. "When you graduate, come home to Asteria. You'll be our outreach director. She choked on a sob and nodded so hard she nearly dropped the tray in her hands. Valerie stepped back, and Ethan faced the room. No applause, he said, raising one hand gently. No headlines, no press releases. He pointed to the QR code behind him. Just one name, one person, one chance. He walked toward the piano, reached into his coat, and pulled out the red-handled screwdriver. He held it up not like a tool, but like a symbol. "I tuned your piano," he said. "Now tune this city." A moment passed. Then the room erupted, not in noise, but in movement. People rushing toward the pledges, toward each other, toward something they'd forgotten they could be part of. And Ethan turned back to Luna. "You still hungry?" he asked. She smiled. "A little." He laughed. "Good, because tomorrow night we're feeding everyone." Valerie placed a hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. "I'll be there." The ballroom no longer belonged to the elite. It belonged to the awakened. Phones lit up like constellations, not for photos, not for social clout, but for something quieter, truer, commitments. A pledge form glowed across the LED wall, sponsor one skill, one life, 1 year. Beneath it, names scrolled in real-time: executives, interns, artists, donors, waitstaff. Signing, giving, listening. Valerie Wynne stepped back from the crowd, her hands folded, her face still wet from tears. She had faced IPO deals, hostile takeovers, international tribunals, but nothing had ever unraveled her like one man with a screwdriver and a lullaby. She found Ethan standing near the piano, gently wiping a smudge off one of the keys with the edge of his sleeve like it was still his to care for. Luna clutched his hand, her little fingers wrapped around his like ivy on stone. Valerie approached. "I meant what I said," she told him. "The position. Full oversight. You don't just deserve a seat at the table. You deserve to rebuild it." Ethan looked at her calm as ever. "I'm not used to polished tables," he said, "but I know how to build one sturdy enough to hold the weight of real people. That's exactly why it has to be you." A pause. Then she added softer, "And I hope you'll let me be there too, not just as a donor, but as someone who remembers how to show up." Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward Maya, who stood near the edge of the room, nervously fiddling with her name tag. Her eyes were puffy, lips pressed tight like she didn't trust them not to tremble. He called to her, "Maya." She startled slightly, then walked over, holding her tray like a shield. "You still planning to graduate next year?" She nodded, voice barely audible. "Spring semester." "Good," he said, "because when that day comes, your job's waiting." Maya blinked. "I don't understand." Ethan smiled. "Outreach director. Asteria's going to need someone who knows how to listen with more than their ears. You did that tonight. You were the first one who saw us." Her lip trembled. "But I didn't do anything. You stopped moving when everyone else laughed," he said. "Sometimes standing still is the loudest kind of courage." Maya covered her mouth with one hand, tears slipping free now. I'll make you proud. You already did." Valerie reached into her clutch and pulled out a silk square, a vibrant indigo cloth with a stitched emblem of a rising sun in gold thread. She folded it gently, then placed it in Maya's hands. "This is the first," she said. "Asteria's new symbol. Every worker, every trainee, every volunteer who walks through that door gets one." Maya stared at it, overwhelmed. A clean cloth, Valerie added, for a clean start. Ethan looked at the cloth, then at Maya. "It's not just fabric," he said. "It's a promise." Luna, wide-eyed, pointed to the emblem. "It looks like the sun waking up." Everyone smiled. Harold Quinn, who had been quiet near the back, stepped forward now, leaning gently on his cane. He looked at Ethan like someone who'd found a long-lost song. "We have something else for this center," Harold said. "Music." He turned to Valerie. "Give me a room. 4 walls, a piano, and I'll teach every kid who walks in how to speak without speaking." Valerie nodded slowly as if sealing a contract without needing ink. "You'll have it. Name it the Harmony Room," Harold said, "because that's what happens when different notes finally learn how to live together." Ethan nodded with a quiet reverence. "I'll be downstairs," he added, "teaching how to fix pipes and pedals. No good music happens in broken rooms." Valerie tilted her head, smiling. "Then, I guess I'll be in the kitchen serving dinner every Friday." "Can you cook?" Luna asked innocently. Valerie froze, then laughed. "Not well, but I can learn." Ethan leaned into his daughter. "You just made a billionaire nervous." Luna giggled. The crowd around them had started to settle. The room felt lighter. Not empty, clear. Ethan turned back to the microphone, stepped up once more. "One last thing." The room hushed again. "I don't want this night remembered because of me. Not even because of what we gave, but because of what we chose." He pointed to the banner now glowing behind him. "Every life you touch, every hand you reach, every chance you offer, it's not charity, it's correction." He glanced toward the door where janitors had once been expected to stay behind the scenes. "And if a man with a mop and a middle C can bring this city back into tune, then I promise you, so can you." A slow, grounding silence followed. Then Maya stepped forward, held up her cloth, and said with trembling pride, "For the record, I pledge 1 year, 1 skill, 1 life." Dozens of voices followed, then hundreds. Phones lifted not for photos, but for signatures, for commitment, for community. Ethan took Luna's hand again, leading her back to the piano. He placed her small fingers gently on the C key. "Start with this," he whispered. "Let the world hear you." "You know," Valerie murmured, her voice catching against the night wind, "when I built this rooftop, I thought it would be for champagne toasts. Power brokers. The kind of place where people make decisions that shift millions." She looked around now. No flutes, no red carpet. Just Ethan, Luna, Maya, Harold, and a dozen volunteers peeling off their name tags and watching the city breathe. I never imagined it had become a place where healing started. Ethan stepped beside her, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, eyes focused on the skyline. He said nothing for a moment. Then, gently, "Sometimes the best kind of glass room is the one that finally lets the outside in." Valerie turned to face him. "You could have walked away tonight. You had every reason to. But you stayed." "I stayed," Ethan said, "because someone once stayed for me." He glanced at Luna, who had curled up on a beanbag nearby, humming quietly to herself, tracing invisible notes in the air with her fingers. Valerie followed his gaze. "She's going to remember this night for the rest of her life, isn't she?" Ethan nodded. "She'll remember that her voice cracked open a tower that had been silent for too long." Suddenly, from inside the glass door, a soft piano chord floated out. A low C. "Harold." Valerie blinked. "Is he?" He said music was meant to echo. Ethan smiled. "I think he wants the city to hear us one more time." Valerie opened the door and the rooftop lounge filled with melody. Not a performance. A prayer. Inside the hall, Harold's weathered fingers moved across the keys like they remembered every goodbye he never got to say. The lights were low, the crowd had thinned, but those who stayed still, as if afraid even breath might break the moment. Ethan stepped back in, carrying Luna in his arms. She was half asleep, cheek resting on his shoulder. But as the melody shifted, her eyes fluttered open. She looked toward the piano and whispered, "That's not just Grandpa's song." Ethan leaned in. "No." Luna smiled sleepily. "That's the one you used to hum, when I had bad dreams." Valerie turned, startled. Ethan's face softened. "It's an old Irish lullaby. My father taught it to me, before he passed. I didn't know Harold knew it too." From the bench, Harold lifted his head. His voice carried across the silent room. "Because I was there, Ethan. The world held its breath. I was there. The day your father died in the boiler fire at Benton Street Hospital, I was the one who couldn't pull him out. Ethan froze. The air cracked not with noise but with memory. I saw your face through the ambulance window, saw how you held your mother's hand. I thought if I ever made it out of this industry, I'd find a way to give something back to the boy I couldn't save. Ethan's throat tightened. You gave more than that, he finally said. You gave me my daughter's song. Harold stood, slowly walked over. And now you've given the city its own. He reached into his coat, pulled out something wrapped in velvet, handed it to Ethan. It was an old harmonica, worn, dented with initials barely visible. D.H., his father's. I found it in the wreckage. Kept it for years. Couldn't explain why. But tonight, I think it's time it came home. Ethan swallowed hard. Valerie stepped beside him, voice steady. Tonight was more than a fundraiser. It was a reckoning. She turned toward the remaining guests. You came here for a gala. You leave as founders. A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. Ethan looked down at the harmonica, then back at Harold. There's a room at the new center, he said quietly. I'd like to build it with your name on the door. Harold chuckled, eyes shining. Only if it has a bad piano and a worse coffee machine. It's a deal. Just then, Maya approached with an idea forming in her eyes. What if? She began, then paused. What if we didn't wait 6 months to open the center? Valerie raised a brow. Maya people are ready now. Look at tonight. They're awake. They want to give. To be there. We can turn the warehouse on 11th into a pop-up start site. I've already mapped it. Emergency beds, temporary skill pods, even a music corner. 1 week. We could do it in 1 week. Silence. Then Ethan smiled slowly. I think this city's been waiting longer than that. 6 days later, 11th Street. The pop-up begins. The old warehouse door creaked open. Inside, rows of clean cots, tool benches, notebooks stacked high, walls painted with murals, each one featuring a stitched golden sun, and in one corner a tiny raised platform with an out-of-tune upright piano, and a glass donation jar labeled "Pay It Forward, Not Back." Luna stood at the entrance handing out Asteria cloths to each person who entered. A boy with bruised knuckles, a woman with a baby strapped to her chest, a construction worker missing a tooth, a teenage girl with a violin case. All of them stepped through the door with uncertainty and left with something stitched in their pocket dignity. Valerie arrived carrying a tray of coffee. Her heels traded for sneakers. Maya ran clipboard check-ins. Harold was already at the piano. And Ethan. He sat on a wooden stool teaching a man twice his age how to turn a broken wrench into a door latch. You ever think this would happen? The man asked. Ethan just smiled. No, he said. But my daughter did. Snow flurried gently over North Cross as the double doors of the Asteria Center for Dignity and Work opened for the first time. A simple wooden sign hung over the brick archwork. Warmth. Worth. Inside, the lobby still smelled of fresh paint and lemon oil. Light poured through tall windows onto polished floors, but not too polished. Just clean enough to reflect hope. Near the entrance, a plaque was mounted on the wall, a photograph framed in warm cedar. It showed a ruggedly handsome janitor in a navy jacket kneeling beside a grand piano, placing a worn screwdriver on its lid. Etched beneath it were the words, "Sometimes to retune the world. You only need to hear the right human note." Visitors often paused there. Some cried, some placed a hand over their chest, but most just stood quietly as if listening for a note they hadn't heard in years. Inside the community kitchen, laughter rolled like rising bread. Valerie Wynne, no longer just CEO of Valerian Group, now wore rolled sleeves and sneakers. She was sautéing onions with an older woman named Rosa who used to sleep under the 6th Street overpass. "Don't burn the garlic," Rosa said mock stern. Valerie grinned. "Yes, chef?" Once a week, Valerie stepped off every boardroom and into this space not for a photo op, but because, as she'd told a reporter recently, power is meaningless unless you use it to heal the harm it once ignored. Harold Quinn stood in a refurbished music room with mahogany floors. It smelled of rosin and dreams. A little boy in a puffer jacket pecked nervously at a piano. Just the C in the middle Harold coached, pointing with a soft, gnarled hand. The boy struck the note. Now again. Same one. Feel how your whole body listens. A pause. Then a smile. Outside the glass, a line of kids from the shelter waited to try each with a scarf tied at their wrist in Asteria blue, signaling their first week in the center's care. In a bright office overlooking the courtyard, Maya Tran, now 22, adjusted her badge, Director of Outreach and Reentry Programs. A volunteer knocked. "We've got a walk-in discharged from county jail this morning. Needs a bed and a lead on a job." Maya smiled. "We've got both." She rose and grabbed a welcome packet. Inside were 3 things: a warm blanket, a prepaid meal card, and 1 square of cloth Asteria blue. Outside her window, construction workers, many formerly homeless, were finishing the second wing of the center. Each wore one of those cloths on their belt or arm. She remembered what Ethan told her the day he handed her her own scarf. "This isn't charity. It's a flag. It means someone saw you. Someone believes you still matter." Downstairs, the hallway smelled faintly of oil and clean floors. Ethan Cole, now head of facilities and trade education, adjusted a wrench on a sink in the job training bathroom. His hands were calloused, his hair touched with silver, but his eyes clear, anchored, kind. Behind him, his daughter Luna, now 8, was sketching murals on the wall in chalk, people helping people, a violin in one hand, a mop in the other. "Dad," she said, tapping him. "Can I show you something?" He turned, wiping his hands. She pointed to a corner of her drawing, a small heart stitched with thread nestled between 2 hands. Ethan knelt beside her. "That's for us," she whispered, "'cause we're not broken, just stitched better." Ethan blinked away warmth in his eyes. He kissed her temple. "You're the best artist I know." That evening, the main hall hosted its first community dinner. Long wooden tables were filled with men and women in work uniforms, children with freshly brushed hair, and elderly folks who'd once been invisible in the margins of the city. No crystal, no chandeliers, just string lights and warm stew. Ethan stood beside Valerie at the front, holding Luna's hand. Maya sat to the side, notebook open already, jotting outreach numbers. Harold was tuning a cello near the music stand. Ethan stepped to the mic. He cleared his throat, still not used to speaking in front of crowds. "I came here months ago." He began asking to mop a floor for a meal. A soft ripple of recognition. "But what I got was something better than a meal. I got a room full of people who decided dignity doesn't have to be earned, just recognized." He paused. Luna squeezed his hand. And now he smiled. "I'd like to invite everyone to the music room after dinner. Some of our students have been practicing, and my daughter wants to play you a lullaby." Applause swelled, not loud but full. Real. That night in the music room, Luna placed her tiny fingers on the piano keys. Middle C. The room fell quiet. Ethan stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. The same lullaby he once played on a ballroom stage, the one that made a billionaire cry, now filled this humble room. But this time, it wasn't about proving anything. It was about giving. When the final note faded, no one moved. A boy in the back whispered, "I never knew a janitor could sound like that." Harold leaned in. "Now you do." As the guests left that night, they each received a folded cloth the color of morning sky. No logos, no slogans, just a quiet signal. You belong here. You matter. Welcome home. Sometimes all it takes is one quiet note, one act of kindness, one person who believes in second chances. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, would you tell us where you're watching from? We'd love to know which corner of the world you call home. Drop your city or country in the comments. You're part of this community now. And if you believe like we do that stories can heal, that dignity matters, that even a janitor's hands can rebuild broken dreams. Then, please hit that subscribe button. Join us for more stories that remind the world what really matters: love, hope, human worth. From all of us behind the scenes, thank you for spending this time with us. Stay kind, stay human, and we'll see you in the next story.